I am Fredrick C. Harris, Dean of Social Science and Professor of Political Science at Columbia University. And here with me, it is my pleasure to introduce Charles V. Hamilton, the Wallace Sayre Professor Emeritus of Political Science and Government at Columbia University. Professor Hamilton is the author of several important books in the study of race and politics, focusing primarily on the African American experience. He is the co-author of Black Power, A Politics of Liberation with the late Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, as well as The Black Preacher in America, Bench and the Ballot, Southern Federal Judges and Black Voters, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., The Political Biography of an American Dilemma, and co-author with Donna Cooper Hamilton of The Dual Agenda, Race and the Social Welfare Policies of Civil Rights Organizations. Good afternoon, Professor Hamilton. You grew up in Oklahoma.
Muskogee, Oklahoma. I was born there. Okay. But I was bred in Southside Chicago. Okay. But I was born in the Depression. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I was born on October 19, 1929. 10 days later, the crash hit.
Oh, interesting.
And from that date on, my mother said it was all downhill for me. But that aside, now, and we came, part of the Okies went west. Right. Part of them went north. My part went north, and we came north to Chicago in 1935. And from that point on, you see, I was born there, bred in Chicago.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So how did you develop an interest in studying political science?
I wanted first to be a journalist. Mm-hmm. I wrote a lot, poems and everything, and short stories, and I just like to write. And finally, I was told that there aren't many jobs for black people who want to be journalists. And, well, at any rate, I decided I would then go into a job, or study for a job that had security and mobility, and that meant, quote, close quote, the civil service. Mm-hmm. So I just said, well, that sounds like government. Mm-hmm. And so then I went into political science. It wasn't called that then. Really, some places call it government, some places call it public administration, and so forth, which is not an unimportant point for you political scientists. And so I then decided, after getting a bachelor's, but always I was told, son, get your education. Get your education. They can't take that away. That was like eat all your food, you know, and so forth. And so I said, okay, I got a bachelor's from Roosevelt University. Then,
right here in Chicago.
Here in Chicago. Then my older brother, said, well, why don't you go to law school? Fine, you know, I didn't know how. He said, well, you gotta go. And he and his wife financed me in law school to Loyola.
Where did you go to law school?
Loyola, here in the Jebbies. Right. Okay, well, that was about enough, you know, law school. Well, then I taught for a while in the South. Got fired from Tuskegee for reasons frequently discussed. And parenthetically, 30 years later, to their credit, they gave me an honorary degree. Put that aside.
Could you say briefly, what was the issue around your firing?
I was too radical. And my FBI record said that the faculty said I was a communist. And I have my FBI records. And, well, you know, that was part of the saga that you may want to get into. But then I decided I would come back And if I really want to do that, my wife said, well, if you really want to be a professor, you ought to get a PhD. That's the thing that. So I did. I came, interestingly enough, to this university.
So we're at the University of Chicago. So it seems to me you don't venture far from the south side of Chicago.
I'm not a West Sider, or no, that's correct. No, as I said, I was bred here, and that's where I'm gonna bed down. I've made that decision.
Right.
And in fact, in this very room, I'll say it for dramatic effect. I think, every time they give you a PhD, your faculty, they haven't done it for you. Right. And I'm convinced it was in this room. It probably was not, because this was a faculty club. But it's nice coming back. Anyway, so then I went on and did things, got involved in the civil rights movement in the South.
But before we go there, I'd like to know, what was your experience in your doctoral training here? Were there any professors that influenced your work?
Quite a few, but there were several, like Pritchett, C. Herman Pritchett, who was the constitutional law guy. Only one who admitted that I was right and he was wrong, because I was involved in a bit in the Gomillion v. Lightfoot case, the gerrymandering case in Tuskegee. And I was a graduate student here when that decision came down in '62. And we were at his house around the corner up the street here, and we were politely, as graduate students and faculty would, discussing the likelihood that the court would rule in favor of not Gomillion, because they said it's a political question. And I said, no, it's race. It is race. He said, well, they don't touch those issues. Well, look at me, I was right. The next time, he admitted. In a class, I learned from my student, and I just puffed up. I still didn't have a PhD yet. But no, he was a great man, and he was very, very, how should I say? He believed that the law, well, he taught us a lot. He taught me a lot. And that influenced the heck out of me. So I said, well, if I finish this PhD with my law degree, I'm going to combine the two, and I'm going to become an academic activist. Because I never wanted to be just a professor. That was, no. That was not it. I wanted to turn my academic life into an activist one. Right. And I got fired for a lot of times. I got, it's no problem. It was a problem, but that was the origin, if you want to say. And from then on, it was all, if I didn't combine my activism with it, my teaching, I didn't care about that. I really didn't. I didn't want to be a professor or a lawyer simply to be that. I wanted to act. And so it got me into trouble a lot, unless that phone tapped and all that sort of business. And indeed, I remember when I got fired, and I'll stop. I got fired from Tuskegee, and I wrote home and told my mother and brother, and they said, oh, well, gee, son, my mother said, can't you come home and get on at the PO? That's a true story. Yes. The answer is, I did. Every time I got fired, got into trouble, I'd go to the PO. That's the post office
Post
to you,
office,
to your viewers.
Yeah. Many of us have also gotten the same advice from family.
Oh yes, or similar locations. Yes.
Right, or a good government job, right? Yes. But before we go there, it's an interesting story. But I do want to ask, given your years of path-breaking research on the political conditions of African Americans, it led you to become one of the founding scholars in the subfield of race in American politics. And so today, the field, you may not know this, it's called REP.
No, I don't, but I read that in your note to me, and I liked it.
Right.
R-E-P. Now.
Yes, REP. There's a whole section in the American Political Science Association dedicated to the study of race, ethnicity, and politics. But why, and you've mentioned this a bit, why was race, or has race been so central, the study of race have been so central to your scholarship?
Because I thought it was always a factor in everything government did that I understood in American society. Obviously, slavery, the Reconstruction, that history. Now, I thought, well, government then cannot be understood in America without understanding the role race played, and that literature and history is voluminous. And it's in sociology. The sociology people, the history people preceded us. I'm saying us because the word is you're a political scientist, and I know a very good one. Well, we were latecomers. And a lot of our studies winked at the role race. Race was always a sub-subject, how should I say, well, sure, but. Progress, yes, but. And I think, what the heck is this all about? It's a permanent factor in government. And it also occurred to me that some of the major principles of your discipline and mine was that government is best which governs least. I had just the opposite. That government is best which governs most in the lives of those who need it. Now that was the kind of, I never wrote that down, but that was what I was wanting to do. Show that a lot of the narratives, that's another term you youngsters brought on, with us, and it became, even today, the private market sector needs excessive freedom. Limited government is good government. Nonsense. So I began to say, no, race is so important that we must now elevate it to one of the standard barometers that you use to judge the validity of your society. And that's what I hope that REP stuff you're talking about now does. It's not sub. Now, with the history people, I keep seeing this and saying, well, and John Hope Franklin is superb on this, historian. Well, are you a Negro historian, or isn't that American history? No, I said, oh my God, here we go. And then the historians say, well, it's a part of, no, it is America. You don't know American history without knowing that, the race. And I say you don't know American politics without knowing the role race has played and will continue to play. So, and I don't apologize. See, when I came to Columbia, I had to apologize. When I left this university, and this is not libelous, what I'm about to say, one faculty member who was not on my committee, PhD committee, said, well, Hamilton, you're a good guy, you're a good scholar, but don't be a Negro scholar. Negro is a good term then. When you write your dissertation, write on some universal issue, like the British parliamentary system. Grant McConnell told me that. I said, I want to write on the right of blacks to vote in the South. He says, well, that's what they expect you to do as a Negro. Well, dadgummit, I am a Negro. But, so that's, I want to rise above that. I want to legitimize the understanding of that there are ethnic and racial differences. Or then they say, well, the issue is class, not race. Well, I went the Marxist route for a while, but didn't give me much. There is a racial component, and it's not just in this country. It's in South Africa.
Right. But we're gonna get to South
Africa. I
Africa.
thought we would. Well, let me stop. Keep going.
But before we go there, I want to talk about this idea of identity politics. That is, yes, it's the politics of marginalized groups, and it's become an emerging area of study in political science. It remains a constant force, as you know, in the practice of American politics. Your book, Black Power, The Politics of Liberation, which was published in 1967 with the late political activist Kwame Ture, who was also known as Stokely Carmichael. That work still informs our understanding, I believe, and many political scientists believe, black political behavior as well as the politics of marginal groups more generally.
Yes.
After 50 years, it's still in print and used in college courses. In fact, I use it in my course on African American politics at Columbia.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How did you come to write Black Power?
I was involved with SNCC in the South, Student Nonviolent Court. I would go down in Lowndes County, Macon County, Greensboro, and that's what I thought I should do. And I was teaching Lowndes County Freedom Party and all that sort of. Well, I ran into the SNCC people, and I knew I preceded them. SNCC was formed in 61.
Right.
I was down there in the 50s with the TCA in Alabama and so forth in Macon County, Tuskegee. Well, and so I became involved in, but it was clear to me that this was an important movement. The only, of course not. And then some of my friends said, well, now look, be careful, you're a teacher. You're not an activist. Well, I couldn't. So I became involved. I would go to their workshops. They would ask me, I've got some of my archives will show that I became very involved. And so one day I finished a manuscript called The Politics of Civil Rights. Gave it to Random House. They were in process. My editor there said, do you know this fellow, the young guy now? This was 1966, named Stokely Carmichael and SNCC. I said, yeah, sure, I'm good buddies. You think he'd be interested in writing a book for us? And I said, I'll ask him. And so they did, and Stokely came to me and said, no, I will co-author it with you. If you will write it together. And so we did. Now the book I finished, they gave to another guy, and he published it.
Under the same title?
No.
Is this a riddle?
No, it's a matter of archival research.
Okay.
My friend. Okay. Now, it's there. And so they told me that we'll put this aside now, and they gave it to another guy. And you do this book, and so in September of '66, at Lincoln University, I started, and Carmichael would come every month, and he'd spend time, he was mama-ing around the country then, very popular. And he would tape, and I would write. And he wrote 4 chapters, I wrote 5. And I have all those tapes. And we finished it in September, we finished it in May of '67, gave it to Random House. They said, great. They began to put it in motion. By then, Carmichael was off and running, and at that point, August, they were in production. Random House. Stokely, where was he? With Castro. And he was on the podium with Fidel. Revolution now, revolution now. Bennett Cerf, one of the publishers in Random House, said, we're not going to publish this book. Some of the board members said, this is not. I was then summer teaching at UCLA. John Simon, my editor, called me and said, get out here, they're going to kill the book. Okay, I went out overnight. We sat there, 401 Madison. I do this to prove the effect of the story. They said, look, we're going to kill this book if you don't say that you're not violent for violence. That's the thing we don't want to hear. So I said, well, this is our manuscript. They said, call Stokely. We called him through the channels, and I said, Carmichael, they're not going to publish the book. And then he said some good sounding words and said, I don't care. Then John Simon said, well, look, let's you and I sit down and craft a statement, which is on the inside of the book. And people don't understand why that statement is there. And I bet you'll go right back and look at it. August 1967. We wrote something. I called Stokely back, and he says, oh, yeah, man, go ahead. I'll accept that. And the editor said, okay. And that was it. The book was published in October. We're selling 5,000 copies a week for about 1.5 years.
That's extraordinary. Another important scholarly legacy from your work is on the concept of deracialization.
Yes, sir.
And you wrote an essay. It's initially from an essay. I did do my archival work on this question. In a journal called First World.
Yes. Hoyt Fuller?
Yes.
Hoyt Fuller.
Yes, yeah. He was the previous publisher of Black World, which was published by the Johnson Publishing Company, publisher of Jet and Ebony. Right. So
I think we're showing off here.
I think we are, just a little bit. The concept is still debated today, a still controversial concept, at least in the literature and even in the practice of Black politics. How did you get interested in this idea of deracialization? How did it come about? And I should say, it was published in 1977?
That's when the article was published.
Okay.
Yeah. But a few years prior to then, I had been asked by the Democratic Party, the National Democratic Party. Now remember, this was post-Nixon, and race was a serious then and now, but clearly then, and I was becoming more interested then in how can we beat up these conservatives. I'll be very candid, and again, my activism.
Right.
And so one of the chairpersons of the National Democratic Party asked me to draft a document that would they could use in their platform. And so I did, and it was a memo that I gave to the party, and I said, look, there are certain issues that can be racial specific exactly, you know, discrimination. The list was longer than this room. Then there were issues that cut across race lines. All poor people need jobs. All poor people need good health. That was a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. So I said, so let's, in our platform this year, let's deracialize by meaning emphasize these universal issues. Mm-hmm. Cut out the anti-race? No. But deracialized issues, and there are such issues, then and now, my friend. Right. And so then, I then began to, and I was mouthing off on the platform around the country, let's emphasize the deracialized issues. Well, some of my buddies, particularly my black political science buddies, said, Hamilton the sellout. Okay, well, I didn't like it, and I said curse words to them, not really affectionate. But that was in other words, I was trying to be something I really always was, a strategist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is a strategy, man, come on. And so a lot of people for whom I then and now still have respect, and I think I might have overdone it, but they quizzed me on it and they handed me my head. That was my concept of deracialization, a strategy. Because, Fred, it was an electoral strategy. And I'll say something now that and you haven't even mentioned it in your careful research. One of my other ones is, elections are from time to time, not for all time. Now, and I'll say something else that should precede this. See, you causing me to put it all together, and that's wonderful. One of the major points of that Carmichael Hamilton book was on page 44. Before any group can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. Now, in closing ranks, we say, he's a separatist. He doesn't like white people. Kick whites out of the civil rights movement. I said, that's not what we mean. We've got to be organized. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. After that, now you strategize. You come with an organized base. And if it meant compromising, then you better. If it meant deracializing on the minute, you better. Mm-hmm. What's the problem? I'll know what the problem is. A lot of it, and I tried to talk about this before, but it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Democracy is a very ubiquitous term. It means different things to different people at different times. And so that's what I meant then. I still mean it, but I was at fault. I didn't take my time to spell it out. Because I said, look, I'm too busy. That's what I said, that's what I meant. You can't do that.
Right. Well, that segues into another important book you wrote. Deracialization is about a campaign strategy, but you also have had your work, you and your late wife, Donna Cooper Hamilton's book called The Dual Agenda, Race and Social Policies of the Civil Rights Organizations. And you tried to get, you looked at both universal and targeted public policies, right, as a way to challenge the persistence of racial inequality. Have your thoughts changed about what sorts of policies are needed? Is a dual agenda still needed?
Very much. And they change because times have changed. But I would say this. I piggybacked on my wife on that one. That book started from her research for her doctorate at Columbia when she talked about the history of the National Urban League, supposedly conservative and so forth. She goes back to the New Deal. And she archivally found that the consistent point of the Urban League was that Negroes need jobs, not arms. That's their slogan, jobs, not arms, jobs, not work, not welfare. And I said, gee, isn't that interesting? It's still today. Everybody needs jobs. That's a universal. We don't want welfare. So then we brought it up to that period, and that was, you need both universal and targeted today. And I'll mention it because it's very clear. I think Obama did exactly as much as he could with what he had on health care. The current administration, Trump's administration, got part of their start with repeal it and replace it. Not repair it, not replace. Okay, fine. Now they're finding out that to repeal, to touch it, even now, Kentucky and so forth, you're going to have some problems. Why? Because there are a lot of poor white folk who voted for that boy, and that's what he is. He's politically, he's a juvenile. So he's a boy, and I'm not trying to be racial. He is messing with a subject that crosses race lines. It is universal, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. So, but then when he comes around and says, "But I'm tired of being politically correct," that's a racial code term, meaning anti-affirmative action. Now, affirmative action in South Africa is not a dirty word. In the United States, it is. You see. Well, it's language and how you use it, and that's what your REP people have to come to terms with. And it's always contextual. Now, I want to say this at my last kind of, I'm not only enjoying this, but you're causing me to think this, and I am. We've got to stop apologizing, and I'm going to say it carefully, and as they say sometimes in an insulting way, I'll speak slowly. We've got to stop apologizing for being racially identified. You can't do that. And so your REP is on target, my man. Is it not the case also? This will be thrown at you. We've already got it. I wrote a book. You mentioned it, Adam Clayton Powell.
Yes.
One of the most popular and important. Adam Powell won. People in office. Adam Powell, too, a scoundrel. Wasted it. And we should have called him out. but we didn't. We protected him. How often does that happen now? We appoint see, now, there are not many John Lewises coming. See, I often thought, and that's where I made a mistake.
Okay.
When I saw John in the SNCC and down the south, I said, that's what. And it was very clear to me, now get this, now I got all these degrees, that anybody who came out of the civil rights struggle was incorruptible. There are not many John Lewises. And so we've got to be on guard against that. The scoundrels, the sycophants in our movement, we've got to clean our house. Oh yes. And now, of course, the biggest sycophant is the president, but we didn't do that now. See, black people did not elect that man. But we've got to get white people now to become just as politically literate and active as we hope we will be.
Well, we know that, the push for accountability is something that's always been an issue when we think about democracy, and specifically when we think about black politics. But I want to ask you this last question. We talked a little bit about this, what you're working on now. I'm going to use the R word anyway. There's a rumor, there's a rumor that you're working on a book about racial politics in South Africa.
It's called Taking Democracy Seriously.
Okay. And it is briefly about?
Well, just what I've been saying, except that I'm giving a definition of democracy that is mine and doesn't have to be accepted anywhere else. But I suggest, and I take this from Lyndon Johnson in his statement on the Voting Rights Act. I think that a legitimate democracy has to mean the following. One sentence. Those people who are to be governed should have the right to choose who governs them. That means universal adult suffrage.
Okay.
Now, that also means don't corrupt it by gerrymandering, bribery, by a whole range of things we do in our system to corrupt it. Some legal, some illegal. Bribes, of course, but gerrymandering.
Yes.
Citizens United. Now your audience is very intelligent. They know what that's a plutocracy. That's not a democracy. So that's where I'm going, and I'm going to compare the development of this in this country, which I know something about, and South Africa, when I've been there 103 times now, since 1979. I used to go 3 times a year. And I'm going to continue going because there the dimension is very interesting. It's predominantly black and colored, and predominantly poor. It's a smaller country, which is very important. We are 350 million? They're 55. And let's face it, size makes a difference. They've got 11 different languages. We've got 1.5 or 2. So then I just want to see how they work it out now. They are also very, very concerned about a market economy, i.e. small c capital. So are we, big C. And so a few can't speak in decades, can't speak in years, but in the few days I have left, Fred, I want to spend time just looking at that and studying. I'm not going to be a scholar. I mean, I'm not going to be an activist. No, look at that. It's not my call. I'll make a lot of calls in the United States. But that's why we give scholarship money, my wife and I over there. I buy my way in. Oh, yes. I don't go over there expecting them to pay me. Good seeing you, my man.
Good seeing you. This has been extraordinary. Thank you so much.
Okay. All the best to you, Fred.
You too.